Welcome back to the I24 News Desk. If you're just joining us, we're here with our top story. A vote in the British Conservative Party, a vote of confidence against Theresa May. Voting has now ended. We're expecting results shortly. That vote triggered when enough Conservative rebels handed in letters saying they have no confidence in Theresa May's leadership. She's promising to fight with everything she's got to keep her job and deliver Brexit, according to reports from inside that closed-door meeting, telling MPs she wanted to see Brexit through and would resign before the next election. But here to make sense of what on earth is going on, which is the question we all want to know, British commentator Tom Gross. Tom, whether you supported Brexit, whether you were against it, I don't think anyone looks at this crisis happening in Britain now, the gravest crisis since the war, and says this is what we planned. The British political system almost unrecognisable now with the hysteria it's gone into. Quite a long cry from the far cry from the level-headed, pragmatic politics Britain is used to. Are people who supported Brexit, deep down, even if they're not saying it out loud, beginning to regret this experiment?
I suspect yes. The polls show not much movement, i.e. most of those who voted for Brexit over 2 years ago say they still support it. But I suspect deep down they see it's far harder to implement than they suspected. We're only at the beginning of the process. We're in fact near the end of the beginning. And I think they now realise that it's not easy to divorce 27 other countries smoothly to your advantage. Britain is not in a strong enough negotiating position. I also suspect that many people are blaming the Prime Minister, Theresa May, which is why there's a no confidence vote in her. But I suspect that people realise that it's not just about her. She's done her best, and maybe no British Prime Minister. Although certainly many people on the Brexit wing are saying, actually, we now have a Prime Minister who's trying to lead the country into Brexit, who never believed in this project to begin with, and trying to pin the blame on her, perhaps hoping that another leader in the next 2 months could turn the ship around. So let's say Theresa May does lose this vote of confidence, or wins it by a small enough margin. She feels her authority is shot and she has to resign. Would any leader make a difference at this point? I very much doubt it. Of course, the strong Brexiteers think that she's been doing damage limitation, and they want a Prime Minister who's enthusiastic about Brexit. And she, to remind viewers, voted Remain. She was never a strong supporter of Brexit. Certainly at this late stage, given the fact we've only got 3 months or so till Britain is meant to leave the European Union, it's virtually impossible to renegotiate what has taken 2 years of negotiations with the EU. I don't see any movement from the EU. Even were they to give a few more concessions to Britain, it won't nearly satisfy the strong Brexiteers. And why would they choose to side with the country that wants to leave the European Union against, say, Ireland, a country that remains inside the European Union? Even the European Union has an interest that if there's going to be a divorce, and the EU really just wants to get this over with, that it be at least amicable if they're not going to end up getting back in bed together. But, you know, before this referendum happened, there were many analysts making all sorts of predictions about why Brexit would be a disaster. Many on the Brexit side dismissed it as Project Fear. But what have been the main obstacles that have made this task so difficult to deliver? Well, there are several, but first of all, the United Kingdom has a land border with the Republic of Ireland, i.e. it has a land border. As long as it wants to keep Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom, that is always going to be a difficult situation to maintain peace within Ireland. Let's explain just to viewers who are not with the ins and outs of British politics that effectively the European Union is demanding that Britain keep an open border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. But of course, Britain says, well, either that means we have to be in the same customs union as the rest of the EU, or we have to split British territory in two by keeping Northern Ireland in some sort of arrangement with the EU and the rest of Britain outside it. Well, it's also that, to remind remind viewers, there has been a historical conflict within Northern Ireland between those mainly Catholic part of the population that wants or did want reunification with the rest of the island of Ireland. So
an often forgotten sectarian conflict in a corner of Western Europe.
It can be very easily explode again, and there used to be terrorism and all kinds of violence and troubles and so on. So it's a very delicate piece there. So they've got to be very careful not to unravel this piece while withdrawing from the EU. But I'd also, to answer your question, say something wider. The European Union, Brexiteers thought that other European Union countries may also follow Britain out. In fact, all 27 countries have rallied together and have actually brought them together, ironically, Brexit. So they almost have to keep the peace among themselves. If a country, i.e. Britain, were to leave and then have more advantageous terms and trading and the like with the EU from outside it, they are opening a Pandora's box for other countries to also leave, and they simply cannot afford to do this.
So to extend that analogy, we're talking about the European Union and Britain negotiating a divorce settlement where the EU wants to make Britain suffer lest the other wives run away.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to them because unlike, say, somebody in Saudi Arabia who has several wives, they're not so... I mean, that's not a good analogy anyway, but they're not so much in control, and they cannot afford a success story of someone jumping ship, because they're worried the whole ship will start going down.
Certainly the European Union not happy about that ruling, that court ruling saying Britain can unilaterally revoke Brexit if it wants, because then other countries might also say, right, we're out, and then march back in.
I suspect that ruling early this week will only strengthen the positions of the EU. And as you say, of course they would prefer an amicable divorce, but not to the extent that it endangers their own internal harmony. That's much more important to them than relations with Britain. And
well, there are two in this marriage. Of course, the British people as well. Many MPs have been campaigning for another referendum. Let's cut the spin. They call it a people's vote, but this is another referendum, which they want to be not just a straight-up referendum on whether to accept the deal or no deal, but possibly cancelling Brexit altogether. Is there a realistic possibility that Brexit could not happen after all?
Well, Theresa May keeps on saying there will not be a second referendum, but to quote Shakespeare, I suspect the lady doth protest too much.
She also said there wouldn't be a snap election before calling one in 2017.
I suspect that at the end of the day, no other scenario commands majority support in the Commons. The longer this chaos goes on, I suspect public sentiment will move towards holding a second referendum with a view to possibly cancelling Brexit and staying in the EU.
Tom Gross, truly living through extraordinary times in Britain, once the most stable, pragmatic country in Europe, now experiencing a very severe crisis. Thank you for that insight.